The telegram from Lydia Thompson had not mentioned the Limp, and Yates Jackson stood on the platform with his hat in his hands, watching the passengers disembark from the afternoon train as July heat shimmered off the rails in Amarillo, Texas. He was 27 years old, 6 feet of weathered muscle and sun-darkened skin, and he had not spoken to a woman with any real intention in 3 years, not since he had buried his mother and inherited a cattle ranch that stretched across 2,000 acres of stubborn grassland. The advertisement he had placed in the Boston Herald had been brief and practical, asking for a woman of good character who understood hard work and did not expect luxuries. And when Lydia's letter arrived with her photograph, he had seen intelligence in her eyes and determination in the set of her jaw, qualities he valued more than beauty, though she possessed that too in an understated way that made his chest tighten when he looked at her picture. The train hissed and groaned as it settled on the tracks, and passengers began to descend, their faces showing relief at reaching their destination after days of uncomfortable travel. Yates scanned the crowd, looking for the woman whose face he had memorized from the small daguerreotype she had sent. He saw families reuniting, businessmen in dusty suits stepping onto the platform, an elderly couple moving slowly down the steps, and then he saw her. Lydia Thompson emerged from the train car, one hand gripping the railing with white-knuckled intensity, and he noticed immediately that her left leg dragged slightly as she navigated the steep steps. She wore a traveling dress of dark green that had probably been fine once, but now showed the wear of a long journey, and her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun beneath a small hat that had seen better days. She was 23 years old according to her letter, and as she reached the platform and straightened her spine with visible effort, Yates saw the pride and fear warring in her expression. Their eyes met across the crowded platform, and recognition sparked between them despite never having seen each other in person. Yates felt his heart kick hard against his ribs, not from disappointment but from something he could not immediately name, something that tightened in his chest as he watched her take a careful step forward and nearly stumble before catching herself. He started toward her, his long stride eating up the distance, and then he deliberately slowed his pace. He saw the moment she noticed, saw her shoulders lower fractionally from their defensive hunch, and when he reached her, he set his hat back on his head and extended his hand with the same careful slowness. "Miss Thompson," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "I am Yates Jackson. Welcome to Amarillo." Her hand was small in his, but her grip was firm, and when she looked up at him, he saw that her eyes were hazel, more green than brown in the afternoon light. "Mr. Jackson," she replied, and her voice was clear and educated, carrying the crisp consonants of New England. "Thank you for meeting me. I apologize for any delay. The journey was longer than I anticipated." He wanted to ask about her leg immediately, wanted to know why she had not mentioned it in her letters, but he saw the tension in her jaw and the way her fingers trembled slightly as she released his hand. Instead, he looked past her at the train. "Do you have luggage?" "2 trunks," she said. "They are marked with my initials." "I will get them," he said. "There is a bench there in the shade. Perhaps you would like to sit while I collect your things and bring the wagon around." Something flickered in her eyes, gratitude perhaps, or relief, but she shook her head. "I can walk to the wagon. I am not an invalid, Mr. Jackson." The words came out sharper than she probably intended, and he saw her wince slightly at her own tone. Yates nodded slowly. "I did not think you were," he said quietly. "But it has been a long journey, and there is no shame in resting when rest is offered." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something, and whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she gave a small nod. "Very well." I will wait on the bench while you attend to the luggage." He helped her to the bench, noting how she tried to hide her limp but could not quite manage it, and then he went to collect her trunks from the baggage car. They were heavy, packed with everything she owned in the world, he supposed, and as he hoisted them onto his shoulders and carried them to where his wagon waited, he thought about the courage it must have taken to leave everything familiar and travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. The limp complicated things, certainly, made ranch life harder than it already was, but as he loaded the trunks into the wagon bed and went back for Lydia, he found that his initial reaction had not been disappointment, but rather a fierce protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. She was sitting very straight on the bench, her hands folded in her lap, and she was watching the town with the focused attention of someone cataloging everything for future reference. Amarillo was still young in 1883, barely more than a collection of buildings clustered around the railroad, but it was growing fast. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with false-fronted shops and saloons, and the sound of hammers rang from several directions as new construction went up to accommodate the flood of settlers coming west. Lydia's expression was unreadable as she took it all in, and when Yates approached, she stood without waiting for his assistance. "The wagon is this way," he said, gesturing toward the street. He offered his arm, and after a brief hesitation, she took it. He could feel the unevenness of her gait as they walked, could sense how much effort it cost her to maintain her balance, and he kept his pace slow and steady, pretending not to notice when she gripped his arm more tightly crossing the rutted street. The wagon was a sturdy work vehicle, not fancy but well-maintained, pulled by two patient bay horses that Yates had raised from colts. He helped Lydia up onto the seat, and she settled herself with the same careful precision she seemed to apply to everything. When he climbed up beside her and took the reins, she spoke without looking at him. "You are wondering about my leg," she said, and her voice was flat, almost challenging. Yates gathered the reins and clicked to the horses. They pulled out into the street, heading west toward his ranch 15 miles outside town. "I am wondering why you did not mention it in your letters," he admitted, "but the rest is your business unless you choose to share it." She turned to look at him then, surprise evident on her face. "Most men would consider it deception," she said carefully. "Is it a recent injury or something you were born with?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the road. "An injury," she said after a moment. "A carriage accident 3 years ago. The leg healed badly. The doctors said I was fortunate not to lose it entirely." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but he heard the pain beneath the words, pain that had nothing to do with physical injury. "Does it pain you?" he asked. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Especially when I have been on my feet too long or the weather changes. I have learned to manage it." Yates nodded slowly. They were leaving the town behind now, heading out into the grassland that stretched endlessly in all directions, golden and shimmering in the heat. "I have a ranch," he said. 2,000 acres of grazing land, about 300 head of cattle, good water from a creek that runs year-round. The house is sturdy, built by my father 20 years ago. It is not fancy, but it is solid. I have 2 men who work for me, older fellows who have been with the ranch since my father's time. They have their own bunkhouse. I do the cooking for myself usually, and the house is kept clean enough, though I will not pretend it has a woman's touch. Lydia listened without interrupting, and he continued, feeling the need to lay everything out honestly now that dishonesty had been mentioned. "The work is hard, especially during roundup and branding season. I am up before dawn most days and do not come in until after dark. I would not expect you to work cattle, but there are chickens that need tending, a garden that could be much better than I have managed, cooking and cleaning and all the domestic work that I have been doing poorly for 3 years. It is isolated. We are 15 miles from town, and the nearest neighbor is 5 miles south. In winter, we can go weeks without seeing another soul." He paused, watching a hawk circle overhead, and then he said the thing that he knew she needed to hear. "If you find it is not what you want, if you decide you cannot stay, I will pay for your ticket back to Boston. I will not hold you to the agreement if you are unhappy." Lydia was silent for a long time, and when he glanced at her, he saw that she was staring at her hands, her fingers twisted together in her lap. "That is generous," she said finally. "More generous than I expected." "A marriage should not be a prison," Yates said quietly. "I want a partner, Miss Thompson, not a captive." She looked up at him then, and something in her expression shifted, softened. "I should tell you why I did not mention the Limp," she said. "I placed advertisements to several men, and I mentioned my injury in the first 3 letters I sent. None of them wrote back after that. I decided that if I was going to be rejected, I preferred it to be after someone had met me and seen that I am capable despite my limitations, rather than being dismissed out of hand because of a single line in a letter." The honesty in her words struck him hard, and Yates found himself nodding. "That makes sense," he said. "Though for what it is worth, I would have written back regardless." "You say that now," Lydia said with a slight smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "But you had not invested the cost of a train ticket then." "The ticket cost is not what concerns me," Yates said firmly. He pulled the wagon to a halt and turned to face her fully. "Miss Thompson, I am going to speak plainly because I think we have both had enough of dancing around truths. Your limp does not matter to me except as it might cause you pain or difficulty. I need a wife, yes, but more than that, I need a companion. Someone who can share this life and make it feel less lonely. The advertisement I placed asked for someone of good character who understood hard work. Your letters showed me you have both those qualities. The fact that you walk with a limp does not change anything I learned about you from those letters." Lydia stared at him, and he saw her eyes grow bright with tears that she blinked back fiercely. "You are not what I expected," she said, her voice rough. "What did you expect?" he asked gently. "Someone harder," she admitted. "Someone who would measure me like livestock and find me wanting." Yates felt anger flare in his chest, anger at whoever had made her feel that way, but he kept his voice level. "I am not a saint, Miss Thompson. I have a temper and I can be stubborn, and there are probably a dozen other faults you will discover once we know each other better. But I am not cruel, and I will not judge you for something beyond your control." She reached up and wiped her eyes quickly, and when she looked at him again, she had composed herself. "Perhaps you should call me Lydia," she said. "If we are to be married, formality seems unnecessary." "Lydia," he repeated, liking the way her name felt in his mouth. "And you should call me Yates." "Yates," she said, testing it out. Then she smiled, a real smile this time that transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "It is a strong name." "It was my grandfather's," he said, feeling suddenly self-conscious under her direct gaze. He clicked to the horses and they started moving again, the wagon wheels crunching over the dry earth. "We will reach the ranch in about 2 hours. There is a preacher in town, Reverend Matthews. We can go into Amarillo tomorrow or the next day, whenever you are ready, and have the ceremony. Unless you want something more elaborate." Lydia shook her head. "Simple is fine. I have no family to attend, and I suspect you do not either, or you would have mentioned them." "My parents are both gone," Yates confirmed. "My father died 8 years ago, my mother 3 years past. I have a sister in Kansas City, married with children, but we do not see each other often." "What about you?" Her face closed slightly, and he knew he had touched on something painful. "My parents died in the same carriage accident that injured my leg," she said quietly. "I was living with an aunt in Boston after that, but she made it clear I was a burden. When she began making arrangements to marry me off to a butcher in his 50s who already had 6 children and needed a housekeeper more than a wife, I decided to take matters into my own hands." Yates felt that protective anger flare again, stronger this time. "Your aunt sounds like a peach," he said dryly. Lydia laughed, a startled sound that seemed surprised out of her. "That is one way to describe her," she agreed. "She is a deeply religious woman who believes suffering builds character, and she made sure I had ample opportunity to build mine." "Well, you will not find that philosophy here," Yates said. "I believe in hard work and fair dealing, but I do not believe in suffering for its own sake." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Yates found himself hyper-aware of her presence beside him on the wagon seat. She smelled faintly of rosewater and train smoke, and when the wagon hit a rut and she swayed against him briefly, he felt the touch like a brand. He had been alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone close, and the realization of how much he had missed it was almost overwhelming. The landscape around them was endless grassland, broken by occasional stands of mesquite and the dry beds of seasonal creeks. The sky was huge and blue, stretching from horizon to horizon without a cloud in sight, and the heat pressed down like a physical weight. Lydia had taken a handkerchief from her sleeve and was using it to dab at her face and neck, and Yates felt guilty for not thinking to bring water for the journey. "There is a canteen under the seat," he said, gesturing. "Help yourself. I should have offered sooner." Lydia retrieved the canteen and drank gratefully, then offered it to him. He took it and drank, very aware that his lips were touching where hers had just been, and then handed it back. She tucked it away and looked out at the land. "It is so open," she said softly. "In Boston, you could hardly see the sky for all the buildings. Here it feels like you could see forever." "Takes some getting used to," Yates agreed. "Some people find it lonely, others find it freeing." "Which do you find it?" Lydia asked, turning to look at him. He considered the question seriously. "Both," he admitted. "When my mother was alive, it felt freeing. After she died, it felt lonely. I am hoping it will feel freeing again." Lydia nodded slowly. "I understand that," she said. "Boston felt suffocating after my parents died. Every street corner reminded me of them, and my aunt's house was like a tomb. I am hoping for freedom too." They shared a look of understanding, and Yates felt something shift between them, some barrier lowering. He had worried during the 2 months of correspondence that they would have nothing in common, that the reality of living together would be awkward and forced. But now, he began to hope that perhaps they could build something real. The ranch came into view as they crested a low rise, and Yates watched Lydia's face as she took it in. The house was a long, low structure of wood and stone with a covered porch running the length of the front. Behind it stood the barn, the bunkhouse for the hands, several corrals, and various outbuildings. The creek ran along the eastern edge of the property, marked by a line of cottonwood trees that provided the only significant shade for miles. Cattle dotted the grassland, moving slowly in the heat, and he could see smoke rising from the bunkhouse where the hands were probably preparing their evening meal. "It is beautiful," Lydia said, and she sounded like she meant it. "It is home," Yates said simply. He drove the wagon up to the house and helped her down, noting again how she tried to hide her difficulty and how much effort it cost her. Her face was pale beneath its layer of dust and sweat, and he knew she must be exhausted. "Let me show you inside," he said. "The men can help me unload your trunks later." The house was dim and cool after the brightness outside, and Yates watched nervously as Lydia looked around the main room. It was simply furnished with pieces his father had made, solid and functional, but lacking any decoration beyond what was necessary. The kitchen area was clean but sparse, the table large enough for four, but showing wear from years of use. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and doors led off to the two bedrooms and a small room his mother had used for sewing. The larger bedroom was my parents', Yates said, suddenly awkward. I have been using the smaller one. You can have whichever you prefer, and I will take the other. Or if you want, there is a cot I could set up in the sewing room until we are more comfortable with each other. Lydia turned to face him, and her expression was serious. Yates, we are planning to marry. I understand what that means. I do not expect separate bedrooms permanently, though I appreciate the offer of time to adjust. She paused, then added with careful precision, I know what is expected of a wife. My mother spoke with me before she died, and my aunt was very thorough in explaining my duties, though she made them sound rather grim. Yates felt heat creep up his neck. They were being remarkably frank for people who had just met, but he supposed the circumstances called for it. I do not want you to feel pressured, he said firmly. We will take things at whatever pace feels right. There is no rush. She smiled slightly. You are being very considerate, she said, but you should know that I am not fragile despite appearances. My leg may be weak, but I am not. I am beginning to see that, Yates said, returning her smile. Now, would you like to wash up? I can heat some water. We have a bathing room of sorts, just a small space my father added on behind the kitchen. It is not fancy, but it serves. That sounds wonderful, Lydia said with genuine feeling. I feel like I am wearing half the dust between here and Boston. Yates set about heating water and showing her where everything was, and then he tactfully left her to her privacy while he went to unload her trunks and check in with his ranch hands. He found them at the bunkhouse, and they looked up with undisguised curiosity as he approached. She arrived then, said Tom Granger, the older of the two men. He was 56, grizzled and weather-beaten, and he had been his father's best friend. Pretty. That is none of your business, Yates said mildly. But yes, her name is Lydia, and she will be your employer's wife, so you will treat her with respect. Goes without saying, said the other man, Pete Wilson. He was in his early 40s, quiet and reliable. We will welcome her properly. She walks with a limp, Yates said, deciding it was better to address it directly. She was injured in an accident 3 years ago. I do not want either of you making her feel self-conscious about it. Tom nodded slowly. Understood, boss. We will keep it in mind. Yates helped them carry Lydia's trunks into the house, placing them in the larger bedroom which he had decided she should have. Then he went to check on the stock while she bathed, giving her time and space to compose herself. When he returned to the house as the sun was setting, he found her in the kitchen, moving carefully around the unfamiliar space but clearly making an effort to start supper. You do not have to do that tonight, he said quickly. You must be exhausted. I am, she admitted, but I need to feel useful. I cannot sit idle, not after years of my aunt telling me I was a burden. Besides, you need to eat, and so do I. Yates saw the determination in her face and nodded. Then let me help. You tell me what you need and I will fetch it. That stove can be temperamental until you learn its quirks. They worked together in the small kitchen, and Yates found himself enjoying the domestic partnership in a way he had not anticipated. Lydia was efficient despite her unfamiliarity with the space, and she had a dry sense of humor that emerged as they cooked, making observations about Boston and her journey that had him chuckling. The meal was simple, just bacon and beans with cornbread, but it tasted better than anything he had made for himself in months, probably because he was sharing it. They ate at the table as darkness fell outside, and Yates lit the lamps, pushing back the shadows. Lydia ate with good appetite, which he took as a positive sign, and when they had finished, she insisted on helping with the dishes despite his protests. "You will wear yourself out," he said, watching her move back and forth from the table to the kitchen. "I will sleep well then," she countered. But he saw the lines of exhaustion around her eyes and the way she was favoring her bad leg more as the evening progressed. When the dishes were done and put away, an awkward silence fell between them. They were married in intention but strangers in fact, and the reality of the sleeping arrangements hung unspoken in the air. Finally, Lydia broke the silence. "I should retire," she said. "It has been a long day and I am more tired than I want to admit." "Of course," Yates said. "I put your trunks in the larger bedroom. There is fresh water in the pitcher and extra blankets in the chest if you need them, though you probably will not in this heat." Lydia nodded and moved toward the bedroom door, then paused and looked back at him. "Thank you, Yates," she said softly. "For everything today, for being kind, for slowing your pace." He felt his throat tighten at her words. "You are welcome, Lydia. Sleep well." She disappeared into the bedroom, and he heard the soft sound of the door closing. Yates stood in the kitchen for a long moment, looking around at the house that suddenly felt less empty. And then he went to the smaller bedroom and lay down on his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the woman sleeping one room away. The next morning, Yates woke before dawn as usual, but when he emerged from his room, he found Lydia already in the kitchen with coffee brewing. She was dressed in a simple calico dress, her hair braided and pinned up, and despite the early hour, she looked determined. "You should have slept longer," he said, accepting the cup of coffee she handed him gratefully. "I am used to early mornings," she replied. "My aunt believed idleness was sinful, so we rose before dawn every day regardless of need." "Well, there is genuine need here," Yates said. "But you do not have to prove anything. Take time to settle in." Lydia met his eyes steadily. "I would rather stay busy. Show me what needs doing." So Yates showed her the chicken coop and the vegetable garden that had gone mostly to weeds without his mother's attention. He introduced her to Tom and Pete, who were awkwardly courteous, and he explained the daily rhythms of the ranch. Lydia listened intently, asking practical questions, and he could see her mentally organizing the information. "We should go into town tomorrow," she said as they walked back toward the house, "for the wedding, unless you have changed your mind." Yates stopped walking and turned to face her. "I have not changed my mind," he said firmly. "Have you?" She shook her head. "No." "I told you I am not fragile, Yates. I meant it. I came here to marry you, and I intend to do so unless you decide you do not want me." "I want you," he said, and the words came out more intensely than he intended. He saw color rise in her cheeks, and he cleared his throat. "What I mean is, yes, let us go to town tomorrow and have the ceremony. The sooner it is done, the sooner we can settle into our life together." The next morning they took the wagon into Amarillo. Lydia wore her best dress, a dark blue silk that had been carefully preserved, and Yates wore his Sunday suit, brushing the dust off his hat before they left. The journey into town passed in mostly comfortable silence, though Yates noticed Lydia growing increasingly nervous as they approached. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. "Third and fourth thoughts," she admitted. "But I am not backing out. I am simply aware that we are about to make a permanent commitment to each other based on a few letters and one day of acquaintance." "That is more than some couples have," Yates pointed out. "My parents met at a barn dance and married 3 weeks later. They had 40 years together and never regretted it." "That is comforting," Lydia said. "I hope we can say the same someday." Reverend Matthews was a jovial man in his 50s who asked no awkward questions and seemed genuinely pleased to perform the ceremony. They stood in the small church with Tom and Pete as witnesses, and Yates found himself unexpectedly moved as he spoke his vows. When he slipped his mother's wedding ring onto Lydia's finger, having quietly resized it the week before in hope, he saw tears glisten in her eyes. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Matthews said with satisfaction. "You may kiss your bride." Yates hesitated, suddenly uncertain, but Lydia solved the problem by stepping forward and lifting her face to his. He kissed her gently, briefly, and felt something warm unfold in his chest. When they stepped apart, she was smiling and he found himself smiling back. They signed the register and accepted the Reverend's congratulations, and then they were outside in the bright sunlight, officially married. Tom and Pete offered their best wishes and discreetly disappeared, giving them privacy, and Yates helped Lydia up onto the wagon seat. "Well, Mrs. Jackson," he said, climbing up beside her. "How does it feel to be married?" "Strange," she admitted. "Hopeful, a little frightening. How does it feel for you?" "The same," he said honestly, "but mostly hopeful." They stopped at the general store to pick up supplies, and Yates introduced Lydia to the proprietor, Marcus Henley, a shrewd businessman who had been one of the first to establish himself in Amarillo. Word traveled fast in a small town, and by the time they left the store, several other townspeople had found reasons to stop by and meet the new Mrs. Jackson. Lydia handled it all with quiet grace, accepting congratulations and deflecting nose-ear questions with polite firmness. On the way back to the ranch, they stopped by the creek, and Yates helped Lydia down from the wagon. They sat in the shade of the cottonwoods with their feet dangling in the cool water, eating the lunch they had packed. "This is nice," Lydia said, watching the water flow past. "Peaceful." "I used to come here as a boy," Yates said. "It was my favorite place on the ranch, still is, I suppose." Lydia turned to look at him, her hazel eyes thoughtful. "Tell me about your parents," she said. "What were they like?" So Yates told her about his father, a quiet man who had loved the land and worked it honestly, and his mother, who had been the social heart of their small family, always ready with a story or a song. He told her about growing up on the ranch, learning to ride and rope and brand, and about the loneliness that had settled over everything after his mother's death. "She would have liked you," he said finally. "She always said I needed someone with backbone to keep me from getting too set in my ways." "Your sister in Kansas City," Lydia said. "Will she be upset that you married without telling her?" Yates shook his head. "Sarah has her own life. We exchange letters a few times a year, but we are not close in the way some siblings are. I will write and tell her, and she will be happy for me." Lydia nodded and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I should tell you about the accident, about what happened." Yates turned to face her fully, giving her his complete attention. She was staring at the water, and her voice was distant as she spoke. "We were coming home from the theater," she said. "It was raining, the streets were slick, and the driver was going too fast. A dog ran out in front of the carriage, and the horses spooked. We overturned. My father was killed instantly when he struck his head. My mother died 2 days later from internal injuries. I was pinned beneath the carriage. The doctors said I was fortunate that my leg was only crushed rather than severed, but it did not feel fortunate at the time." Her voice was steady, but Yates could hear the old pain beneath the words. He reached out and took her hand, and she gripped his fingers tightly. "I was in bed for 4 months," she continued. "The pain was extraordinary. They gave me laudanum, but I hated the dreams it brought, so I learned to endure without it. When I finally walked again, I realized I would never walk normally. The limp would be permanent. My aunt made it clear that this made me less marriageable, less useful, less everything. She was not deliberately cruel, I think. She simply believed in facing unpleasant truths directly." "Your aunt was wrong," Yates said firmly. "You are not less anything because of your injury. You survived something that killed both your parents. That takes extraordinary strength." Lydia turned to look at him, and he saw surprise in her eyes. "You really believe that?" "I do," he said. "I have known you less than 2 days, Lydia, but I can already see your strength. Anyone who has survived what you have and still has the courage to start a new life in a strange place is remarkable in my book." She leaned against him then, resting her head on his shoulder, and Yates put his arm around her carefully. They sat like that for a long time, listening to the water and the wind in the cottonwoods, and he felt something settling between them, some foundation being laid that he hoped would support everything to come. The first weeks of their marriage fell into a rhythm that surprised Yates with its ease. Lydia threw herself into the domestic work with determination, taking over the cooking and cleaning and transforming the house from a bachelor's functional space into something warmer and more welcoming. She planted new vegetables in the garden, nursed the struggling plants back to health, and began making improvements to the chicken coop that resulted in better egg production. She was up before dawn every day despite Yates's protests, and she rarely complained about the heat or the isolation or the endless work. But Yates watched her carefully, and he saw how much effort it cost her. He saw the way she gripped the edge of the table when she thought no one was looking, resting her bad leg. He saw the lines of pain around her eyes on the days when the weather changed or she had been on her feet too long. And he saw the fierce pride that kept her from admitting weakness, the determination to prove herself that drove her past sensible limits. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after their wedding, he came in from checking the herd to find her collapsed in a chair, her face gray with exhaustion and pain. She tried to stand when he entered, but her leg buckled and he caught her before she fell. "Enough," he said firmly, sweeping her up into his arms and carrying her to the bedroom despite her protests. "You are going to rest." "The bread needs to be checked," she said, trying to push against his chest. "And the chickens need feeding and there is mending to be done." "The bread will be fine. I will feed the chickens and the mending can wait," Yates said. He laid her on the bed and pulled off her shoes, noting the swelling in her left ankle. "Lydia, you are going to hurt yourself permanently if you keep pushing like this. You do not have to prove anything to me." "You do not understand," she said, and there were tears in her eyes now. "If I do not work, if I am not useful, then what am I? Why would you want me?" Yates sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. "I want you because I like you," he said simply. "Because you make me laugh at breakfast, and because you listen when I talk about the cattle, and because having you here makes this house feel like a home again. Not because you work yourself to exhaustion trying to be someone you think I need." Lydia stared at him, tears spilling down her cheeks now. "My aunt said no man would want a crippled wife unless she could prove she was worth the burden." Yates felt rage flash through him, hot and sharp. "Your aunt," he said through gritted teeth, "was a cruel and ignorant woman who never should have been trusted with your care. You are not a burden, Lydia. You are my wife. And I am asking you, as your husband, to please stop hurting yourself to prove something that does not need proving." She broke then, sobbing into her hands, and Yates gathered her into his arms and held her while she cried. He murmured soothing words and stroked her hair, and he silently cursed the aunt who had done this to her, who had taken a young woman's tragedy and used it to break her spirit. When the storm passed, Lydia pulled back and wiped her eyes. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to fall apart like that." "Do not apologize," Yates said. "You are allowed to have feelings. You are allowed to be tired and hurt and overwhelmed. That is what marriage is, Lydia. Having someone to lean on when you need to." She studied his face for a long moment. "You really mean that?" "I do," he said. "Now I am going to go check that bread and feed the chickens. You are going to stay here and rest." Tomorrow, we are going to talk about how to divide the work more reasonably so you are not running yourself into the ground. Agreed, Lydia nodded slowly. Agreed, she whispered. True to his word, Yates took over more of the work and they found a better balance. Lydia still insisted on doing the cooking and most of the domestic chores, but she accepted his help more readily and stopped pushing herself past her limits. And as the summer faded into fall, something else began to grow between them. It started small, in shared glances and casual touches that lingered a bit longer than necessary. Yates found himself looking for excuses to be near her, to brush past her in the kitchen, or to sit close to her on the porch in the evenings. And he noticed that she did the same, that her eyes followed him when he worked, and that she smiled more readily when he was around. They were still sleeping in separate bedrooms, though Yates had moved back into the larger room at Lydia's insistence. But increasingly, he found himself lying awake at night, thinking about his wife just beyond the wall and wondering if she was awake too, thinking the same thoughts. One evening in late September, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lydia was mending a shirt, and Yates was supposedly reading a newspaper that was 3 weeks old, but mostly he was watching her. The lamplight caught in her auburn hair, turning it to copper, and her face was peaceful in a way it had not been when she first arrived. "You are staring," she said without looking up from her sewing. "I know," Yates admitted. "I was just thinking how pretty you look." She did look up then, surprised, and he saw color rise in her cheeks. "You have never said anything like that before." "I have thought it," he said. "I just was not sure if you wanted to hear it." Lydia set down her mending carefully. "Why would I not want to hear it?" Yates shrugged, feeling suddenly awkward. "I did not want you to feel pressured. I know we married for practical reasons, not romantic ones. I did not want you to think I expected more than you were willing to give." Lydia was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Yates, I may have come here for practical reasons, but I have stayed for different ones. You have been nothing but kind to me. You have made me feel valued and safe, and somewhere along the way I have come to care for you a great deal." Yates felt his heart kick hard against his ribs. He set aside the newspaper and moved to sit beside her on the porch swing. "I care for you too," he said, his voice rough. "More than I expected to, more than I probably should after such a short time." "There are no rules about how quickly feelings can grow," Lydia said. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his bearded cheek. "I think I started falling for you when you slowed your pace on the platform that first day. You saw that I needed help, but you gave it in a way that preserved my dignity. That meant everything." Yates turned his head and kissed her palm, and he heard her breath catch. "I am going to kiss you now," he said. "Properly this time, not like at the wedding." "I was hoping you would," Lydia whispered. He kissed her slowly, carefully, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but she did not pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her arms coming up around his neck, and the kiss deepened into something that made his head spin. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "Your room or mine?" Lydia asked, and there was a tremor in her voice but also determination. "Are you sure?" Yates asked, searching her face. "I am sure," she said. "I have been sure for weeks. I was just waiting for you to realize you wanted me too." "I have wanted you since the first night," Yates admitted. "I was trying to be honorable." "You have been honorable," Lydia said. "Now be my husband." They went to the larger bedroom together, and Yates made love to his wife with tenderness and care, mindful of her injury but finding that it mattered not at all when passion took over. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Yates felt a contentment he had not known was possible. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I know it is fast, but I do." "I love you too," Lydia replied, her voice drowsy and satisfied. "Thank you for waiting for me to be ready." "I would have waited as long as you needed," Yates said, and he meant it. From that night forward, they shared a bed, and the house felt complete in a way it never had before. Their relationship deepened through the fall and into winter, and Yates marveled at how thoroughly Lydia had become woven into his life. She knew when he was worried about the cattle without him saying a word. She could make him laugh even on the hardest days, and she had transformed the ranch into a real home, filled with warmth and life. In December, a blizzard hit, and they were snowed in for nearly 2 weeks. Yates worried about the cattle and the isolation, but Lydia seemed to bloom in the enforced closeness. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing, and Yates learned more about her childhood in Boston, about her dreams and fears and hopes for the future. "I want children," she said one night as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside. "But I am afraid." "Afraid of what?" Yates asked, pulling her closer. "That my injury will make it dangerous," she admitted. "That I will not be able to carry a child safely, or that I will pass on some weakness." Yates kissed her forehead. "We do not have to decide that now," he said. "And if it happens, we will face it together. But Lydia, your injury was an accident. It has nothing to do with your ability to have children, and any child of yours would be lucky to inherit your strength and determination." "You always know what to say," she murmured, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "I just tell you the truth," he replied. Spring came, and with it came the hard work of calving season. Lydia helped as much as she could, bringing meals out to where Yates and the hands were working and assisting with the orphaned calves that needed bottle feeding. She developed a special touch with the animals, a patience that Yates admired, and by the time the season was over, they had lost fewer calves than in any previous year. In May, Lydia told him she was pregnant. Yates felt terror and joy in equal measure, but he hid the terror for her sake and showed only the joy. They made the trip into town to see the doctor, a crusty old Scotsman named MacGregor, who examined Lydia thoroughly and declared that he saw no reason why she could not carry a child successfully. "The injury was to your leg, lass, not your womb," he said bluntly. "You will need to be careful toward the end when the extra weight makes balance more difficult, but I have delivered babies from women in far worse condition. Take care of yourself, rest when you need to, and do not be foolish." Lydia gripped Yates's hand tightly as they left the doctor's office, and he knew she was as relieved as he was. The pregnancy progressed normally through the summer, and Yates watched his wife's body change with a mixture of awe and protectiveness that bordered on obsessive. He tried not to hover, but Lydia called him on it regularly. "I am pregnant, not dying," she said one morning when she caught him watching her anxiously as she gathered eggs. "Stop looking at me like I am made of glass." "I cannot help it," Yates admitted. "You are carrying my child. I want you both safe." Lydia set down her basket and came to him, taking his face in her hands. "We are safe," she said firmly. "I promise I will tell you if something is wrong, but you have to trust me to know my own body and my own limits." "I do trust you," Yates said. "I am just scared." "So am I," Lydia admitted. "But we will face it together, remember? That is what you told me." So Yates tried to relax, though it went against every instinct he had. He threw himself into preparing for the baby, building a cradle from oak and lining it with soft blankets that Lydia sewed. He made sure the house was stocked with everything they might need, and he arranged for Tom and Pete to handle more of the ranch work, so he could stay close to home as Lydia's time approached. In January of 1885, on a cold night with stars blazing in a clear sky, Lydia went into labor. Yates rode hard into town to fetch Dr. MacGregor while Tom stayed with Lydia, and the doctor arrived just as the contractions were coming fast and hard. Yates was banished to the kitchen where he paced and worried while Pete made terrible coffee that neither of them drank. It was a long night, and Yates aged years listening to his wife's cries from the bedroom. But when dawn broke and he heard the thin wail of a newborn, he felt his knees go weak with relief. Dr. MacGregor emerged a few minutes later, looking tired but satisfied. "You have a son," he said. "A big, healthy boy. And your wife did beautifully. She is asking for you." Yates went into the bedroom on shaking legs and found Lydia propped against the pillows, exhausted but radiant with a small bundle in her arms. She looked up as he approached, and her smile was like the sun coming up. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Yates sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. He had a shock of dark hair and a face red and scrunched from the effort of being born, but he was perfect. Yates reached out a tentative finger and touched the tiny hand, and the baby's fingers curled around his reflexively. "He is beautiful," Yates said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are amazing. I cannot believe you did that." "Women have been doing it for thousands of years," Lydia said with a tired laugh. "But thank you. I am rather proud of myself right now." "What should we name him?" Yates asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Yates felt suddenly certain. "James," he said. "James Thomas Jackson, after both our fathers." Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "That is perfect," she whispered. "Hello, James, welcome to the world." The next months were a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves as they figured out how to care for an infant while still running the ranch. Lydia took to motherhood with the same determined competence she applied to everything, though Yates could see the exhaustion weighing on her. He helped as much as he could, taking the night feedings when James would accept a bottle and handling all the domestic chores so Lydia could rest. But despite the exhaustion, Yates had never been happier. Watching Lydia with their son, seeing the love and tenderness in her face as she nursed him or sang him to sleep, made Yates fall in love with her all over again every day. And holding James, feeling the weight of his son in his arms and the trust implicit in that tiny life, gave Yates a sense of purpose that went beyond anything he had known before. The ranch prospered under their partnership. Lydia's practical mind found efficiencies that Yates had overlooked, and her careful management of the household meant they were able to save money and reinvest in the herd. By the time James was 2, they had expanded the ranch by another 500 acres and increased the herd to 400 head. Tom and Pete were still with them, growing older but no less reliable, and they doted on young James like honorary grandfathers. In the spring of 1887, Lydia told Yates she was pregnant again. He felt the same mix of terror and joy, but this time the joy was stronger because he knew how capable she was. The pregnancy was harder this time, with more sickness and exhaustion, but Lydia endured it with her characteristic determination. In December, she delivered a daughter they named Margaret Rose, after Yates's mother. Margaret was smaller than James had been, more delicate, and Yates felt his heart expand in a new direction as he learned to navigate fatherhood to a daughter. She had her mother's hazel eyes and a disposition that was alternately sweet and stubborn, and by the time she was walking, she had all the men on the ranch wrapped around her tiny finger. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The house was noisier now, filled with the sounds of playing and occasional squabbles, but Yates loved every minute of it. He loved teaching James to ride and helping him learn to rope. He loved carrying Margaret on his shoulders around the ranch and watching her face light up when she saw the new calves. And he loved the evenings when they would all gather on the porch, watching the sunset while Lydia rocked the baby and James played at their feet. Did you ever imagine this? Lydia asked him one such evening when Margaret was about a year old. "When you were placing that advertisement, did you imagine you would end up here?" Yates considered the question seriously. "I imagined a partnership," he admitted. "Someone to share the work with, but I did not imagine love. I did not imagine feeling like this." "How do you feel?" Lydia asked, smiling at him. "Complete," Yates said simply. "Like everything in my life led to you and the children, and now everything makes sense." Lydia reached for his hand, and he took it, their fingers interlacing automatically after years of practice. "I feel the same way," she said. "That day on the train platform, I was so scared. I thought you would take one look at me limping down those steps and send me right back to Boston. Instead, you slowed your pace and changed my life." "You changed mine too," Yates said. "You made me remember what it felt like to not be alone." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue. James was sprawling on the porch floor, playing with wooden animals that Yates had carved, and Margaret was drowsing in her mother's arms, thumb in her mouth. "You ever miss Boston?" Yates asked. It was a question he had never asked before, afraid of the answer. Lydia shook her head firmly. "Not even a little," she said. "Boston was never truly home, not after my parents died. This is home. You and the children and this ranch. Everything I need is right here." As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow and prosper. Yates built an addition onto the house to give the children more room, and Lydia filled it with furniture and decorations that made it warm and welcoming. They became pillars of the small community that was growing around Amarillo, attending church socials and helping neighbors when times were hard. Lydia's limp became just a part of who she was, noticed perhaps by newcomers but unremarked upon by those who knew her. She had proven herself too many times in too many ways for anyone to consider her anything less than formidable. James grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved the ranch and worked alongside his father from an early age. Margaret was bright and curious, always asking questions and getting into mischief, and Yates often said she had inherited the best qualities of both parents. In 1891, Lydia delivered another son, Samuel, who was placid and cheerful from birth, content to observe the world with calm interest. By the mid-1890s, Yates and Lydia had been married for over a decade, and their partnership had only deepened with time. They still made each other laugh. They still sought each other out at the end of long days, and the passion that had sparked between them that first autumn had not faded, but rather evolved into something richer and more complex. "I have been thinking," Lydia said one evening as they sat on their porch. The children were all asleep and they had a rare moment of peace. "About how far we have come." "We have come a long way," Yates agreed. He was whittling a new toy for Samuel, and he looked up from his work to smile at his wife. "I was so angry at my aunt for so long," Lydia continued, "for making me feel worthless, for pushing me away. But lately I have been thinking that maybe I should thank her." Yates raised an eyebrow. "That is a surprising turn. If she had not been so cruel, I never would have answered your advertisement," Lydia said. "I never would have come to Texas. I never would have found you. So in a strange way, her cruelty gave me the greatest gift of my life." Yates set down his whittling and reached for her hand. "I understand what you mean," he said, "but you still deserved better from her. And I am glad you found your way here despite her, not because of her." "Either way," Lydia said, squeezing his fingers, "I am grateful for where I ended up." They sat together in the gathering darkness, and Yates thought about that day on the train platform 12 years earlier. He remembered the jolt of recognition when their eyes met, remembered the way his heart had kicked when he saw her struggle with the steps. He had slowed his pace on instinct that day, giving her time and space to compose herself, never knowing that small gesture would change both their lives forever. "Thank you," he said suddenly. Lydia looked at him quizzically. "For what?" "For taking a chance on me," Yates said. "For getting on that train and coming all this way to marry a stranger. For trusting me enough to build a life together." "Thank you for being worth the risk," Lydia replied. She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her shoulders, holding her close. "Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me from that very first day. Thank you for loving me." "Always," Yates promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The turn of the century brought changes to Texas and to Amarillo. The town was growing rapidly, becoming a real city with new businesses and opportunities. The railroad that had brought Lydia west was now bringing thousands more, and the wild frontier that Yates had known as a young man was slowly being tamed. But on their ranch, 15 miles from town, life continued much as it always had. The cattle still needed tending, the seasons still turned, and the work was still hard. James was 18 now, a capable young man who was starting to take on more responsibility for running the ranch. Margaret was 14, smart and ambitious, talking about maybe becoming a teacher someday. Samuel was 9, still young but already showing signs of having his father's quiet competence. Yates was 43, his hair going gray at the temples and his body bearing the marks of decades of hard labor. But he was healthy and strong, and when he looked at his life, he felt nothing but satisfaction. He had built something good here, something that would last beyond his own lifetime. And Lydia, at 39, was still beautiful to him. Her hair had threads of silver now, and the lines around her eyes were deeper, but her smile still made his heart skip. She still limped, the injury from all those years ago a permanent reminder of what she had survived, but it had never slowed her down in the ways that mattered. One evening in the summer of 1901, they took a rare evening to themselves and rode out to the creek, the place where they had sat on their wedding day and shared their stories. They dismounted and sat in the same spot, their feet dangling in the cool water just as they had 18 years earlier. "I was thinking about that first day," Lydia said, echoing his own thoughts. "When I stepped off that train and saw you waiting, I was so terrified." "I was terrified too," Yates admitted. "I kept thinking, what if she hates it here? What if I am not enough?" Lydia laughed softly. "You were always enough," she said. "More than enough. You gave me back my life, Yates. Before I came here, I felt like I was just existing, just moving through days without purpose. You gave me purpose and family and love. You gave me the same things," Yates said. "This ranch was just a place before you came. You made it a home." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the water and the cicadas singing in the cottonwoods. The sun was setting, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and pink, and Yates felt a deep contentment settle over him. "Do you have any regrets?" Lydia asked suddenly. Yates considered the question carefully. "I regret not having more time with my parents," he said finally. "I regret the hard times we went through, the seasons when money was tight and we worried about losing everything. But do I regret any of my choices? No. Especially not the choice to send that advertisement to Boston." "Good," Lydia said with satisfaction, "because I do not regret answering it, not for a single moment." As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering darkness, Yates thought about all the moments that had led them here. The advertisement placed in desperation and hope, the letters exchanged between strangers, the train journey that brought Lydia across a continent. And that crucial moment on the platform when he had seen her limp and made the instinctive choice to slow his pace, to give her dignity and time. That single gesture had set everything in motion. It had shown Lydia that he saw her as a person, not a commodity. It had given her the courage to stay when she might have fled. and it had been the foundation upon which they built everything that came after. Back at the house, they found the children waiting for them. James had made supper with Margaret's help, and Samuel had set the table. They ate together as a family, talking and laughing, and Yates looked around the table at these people he loved more than life itself. After the children went to bed, Yates and Lydia sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, and a cool breeze brought relief from the day's heat. "I love you," Yates said, speaking the words he tried to say every day but never felt he said often enough. "I love you too," Lydia replied, settling against his shoulder. "Today, tomorrow, and always." They sat together in the darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life together that neither could have imagined alone. The ranch stretched around them, peaceful and prosperous, a testament to what could be achieved through partnership and love. And in the distance, a train whistle sounded, bringing more strangers west in search of new beginnings, just as it had brought Lydia all those years ago. Yates tightened his arm around his wife and smiled into the darkness. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, just as they always had. And that, he thought, was all that really mattered. The years continued to pass with the reliable rhythm of seasons turning. By 1905, James had married a local girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and they were building their own small house on the far corner of Yates and Lydia's property. The young couple planned to help manage the ranch and eventually take it over when Yates was ready to step back. Margaret had gone to teachers' college in Austin and was now teaching at the school in Amarillo, boarding in town during the week, but coming home on weekends. Samuel, at 14, was growing tall and rangy, with his father's quiet demeanor and his mother's sharp mind. Yates was nearing 50 now, and while he was still strong, he felt the years in his joints on cold mornings. Lydia's limp had grown slightly more pronounced as arthritis settled into her injured leg, but she remained as active and capable as ever, though Yates noticed she moved more carefully on the stairs and rested more often than she once had. They had hired 2 younger ranch hands to help Tom and Pete, who were both well into their 70s now and moving toward retirement. The older men had become like family, uncles to the children and trusted friends to Yates and Lydia. Tom still told the same stories he had been telling for decades, and Pete still made the worst coffee anyone had ever tasted, and both of them remained fixtures on the ranch that Yates could not imagine being without. One spring morning, Yates woke to find Lydia already up and standing at the window, looking out at the dawn. He rose and went to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on top of her head. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About how fast it all goes," Lydia said. "It feels like yesterday that I was stepping off that train, and now James is married and Margaret is teaching and Samuel will be grown before we know it." "Time does move quickly," Yates agreed, "but we have used it well, I think." Lydia turned in his arms and looked up at him. There was silver in her auburn hair now, and fine lines marked her face, but to Yates, she was as beautiful as she had been at 23. "We have," she agreed, "but I am not ready for it to be over. I still want more years with you, many more." "Then we will have them," Yates said firmly. "I am not going anywhere and neither are you. We are going to grow old together, Lydia. We are going to see our grandchildren grow up and maybe even our great-grandchildren. We are going to sit on that porch when we are 80 and marvel at how lucky we have been." "Promise?" Lydia asked, and despite the lightness in her tone, he heard the genuine question beneath it. "Promise," Yates said, and he sealed it with a kiss. True to his word, the years continued to be good to them. James and Sarah had their first child, a son they named William, in 1906, and Yates discovered that being a grandfather was even better than being a father. He loved teaching William the same things he had taught James, loved seeing his own father's name and legacy carried forward into a new generation. Margaret married in 1908, choosing a lawyer from Amarillo named Robert Henley, the son of the store owner who had been one of the first people Lydia met in town. The wedding was held at the ranch, with half the county in attendance, and Yates walked his daughter down the makeshift aisle with tears in his eyes, proud and heartbroken in equal measure to be giving her away. Samuel proved to have a head for business that none of them had expected, and by the time he was 20, he was managing the financial side of the ranch operations with skill that impressed even the bankers in Amarillo. He had no interest in marrying young, he told his parents, too focused on building the ranch into something even greater. By 1910, Yates and Lydia had been married for 27 years, and the ranch had grown to encompass nearly 4,000 acres with a herd of over 600 cattle. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, market fluctuations and personal losses. Tom had passed away in 1908, dying peacefully in his sleep at 79, and Pete had followed a year later. Both men were buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore testament to their years of faithful service. But through all the changes and losses, Yates and Lydia remained constant. They still sought each other out at the end of each day. They still talked late into the night about everything and nothing. And the love between them, which had started as a seed of possibility on a train platform decades earlier, had grown into something deep-rooted and enduring, strong enough to weather any storm. One evening in late summer, they rode out to the creek as they often did when they wanted time alone. Yates helped Lydia down from her horse, noting how much more carefully she moved now, and they walked slowly to their favorite spot under the cottonwoods. The creek was low from the summer heat, but it still flowed, still sang its eternal song over the rocks. "You remember the first time we came here?" Lydia asked, settling onto the grass with a sigh of relief. "The day we were married." "I remember everything about that day," Yates said, sitting beside her. "I remember how nervous I was, how beautiful you looked, how I did not know how to talk to you yet but wanted to learn. You were so careful with me," Lydia said softly, "so gentle. I had never had anyone treat me that way before, especially not after the accident. You made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth something beyond what I could do or how I could serve." "You have always mattered," Yates said firmly. "From that first moment. You changed my life, Lydia. You took a lonely man living in an empty house and gave him a family and a purpose beyond just surviving." Lydia reached for his hand, and he took it, their fingers interlacing with the automatic ease of decades of practice. "We saved each other," she said. "I think that is what the best marriages do. Not one person rescuing the other, but both people choosing each other every day and building something together that neither could have built alone." "We have built something good," Yates agreed, looking out at the land that had been his whole life. "Something that will last beyond us." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun lowered toward the horizon. Yates thought about everything they had been through, all the joys and sorrows, triumphs and failures. He thought about the children they had raised and the grandchildren who were growing up strong and loved. He thought about the ranch they had built together, transforming it from a struggling cattle operation into something prosperous and stable. But mostly, he thought about the woman sitting beside him, the wife who had come to him as a stranger and become his best friend, his partner, his love. He thought about how she had never let her injury define her, how she had worked twice as hard to prove herself despite never needing to prove anything. He thought about her strength and her kindness, her sharp wit and her gentle heart. "Thank you," he said suddenly. Lydia looked at him with a slight smile. "You have already thanked me," she said, "many times over the years." "I know," Yates said, "but I do not think I can ever thank you enough for what you have given me, for the life we have built together." "Then I will thank you back," Lydia said, "for seeing past the limp, for slowing your pace that very first day, for showing me that I deserve to be loved, not despite my imperfections but including them." "You have no imperfections," Yates said automatically, and Lydia laughed. "Now I know you are getting old," she teased. "Your eyesight must be going." Yates pulled her close and kissed her, long and sweet, and when they pulled apart they were both smiling. "My eyesight is fine," he said. "I see you perfectly, and you are perfect to me." As the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, they sat together by the creek. Two people who had found each other against all odds and made a life together that exceeded anything either had dared to hope for. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Yates sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the advertisement he had placed in desperation, for the woman brave enough to answer it, and for the moment on a train platform when he had made the choice to slow his pace and change both their lives forever. The years rolled on with quiet grace. By 1915, Yates was 59 and Lydia was 51, and they had 5 grandchildren with another on the way. The ranch was thriving under the joint management of Yates, James, and Samuel, and they had begun to expand into new ventures, including breeding horses that were gaining a reputation for quality throughout Texas. Margaret had 2 daughters and was still teaching, having become the principal of the Amarillo school. She visited the ranch regularly, bringing her girls to run wild in the open spaces she had loved as a child. The grandchildren adored their grandparents, especially the stories Yates would tell about the old days, and the cookies Lydia always seemed to have ready when they visited. Yates found that he enjoyed the slower pace of these later years. He still worked the ranch, but he let the younger men handle more of the heavy labor while he focused on planning and management. He had more time to spend with Lydia, and they took advantage of it, riding out to the creek on nice evenings or simply sitting on their porch and watching the sunset, their hands linked as they had been for over 30 years. One afternoon in early autumn, they were sitting on that porch when a young couple drove up in a dusty automobile, looking lost. Yates rose to greet them, and the young man explained that they were looking for the Henley Ranch, 5 miles south. "You have overshot it," Yates said, giving them directions. "But you are welcome to water your automobile if it needs it, and my wife just made lemonade if you would like some refreshment before you go on." The young woman accepted gratefully, and as Lydia poured lemonade and made small talk, Yates noticed the way the young man hovered protectively near his wife, the way he steadied her when she stumbled slightly on the porch steps. And he noticed with a jolt of recognition that the young woman walked with a slight limp. When the couple had left, properly directed and refreshed, Lydia came to stand beside him, and he knew she had noticed too. "Did you see?" she asked quietly. "I saw," Yates confirmed. "He loves her. You can tell by the way he looks at her." "The way you looked at me," Lydia said. "The way you still look at me." Yates turned to face his wife fully. In the afternoon light he could see every line on her face, every mark of age and time. But he also saw the girl who had stepped off the train 32 years earlier, brave and terrified and determined. He saw the young mother teaching her children to read. He saw the woman who had sat beside him through droughts and deaths, and every challenge life had thrown their way. "I look at you the way you deserve to be looked at," he said simply, "with love and admiration and gratitude for every day we have had together." Lydia's eyes filled with tears, and she reached up to cup his weathered face in her hands. "I hope they have what we have had," she said, referring to the young couple. I hope they build something as strong and lasting." "So do I," Yates said, "but they will have to work for it just like we did. The good things are never easy." "No," Lydia agreed, "but they are worth it." That night, as they lay in bed with moonlight streaming through the window, Lydia said suddenly, "Do you ever think about that first day, about how different things could have been?" "Sometimes," Yates admitted. "If I had been less patient, if you had been less brave. If either of us had given up when things got hard." "But we did not," Lydia said. "We chose each other and we kept choosing each other every single day. That is what marriage is, I think. Not the wedding or the vows, but the daily choice to stay and build something together." "You are very wise," Yates said, pulling her close. "Have I mentioned lately how lucky I am?" "Not since this morning," Lydia teased. "You are slipping in your old age." "Then let me remedy that," Yates said. "I am the luckiest man alive because 32 years ago, a brave woman answered my advertisement and took a chance on a stranger. I am lucky because she saw past my rough edges and gave me a family and a home. I am lucky because she loves me, and I get to love her back, and we have built something beautiful together." "That was quite a speech," Lydia said, but her voice was thick with emotion. "I mean every word," Yates said firmly. He kissed her forehead and then her nose and then her lips. "I love you, Lydia Jackson. I have loved you since I slowed my pace on that train platform and saw the strength in your eyes. And I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Lydia whispered back. "Today, tomorrow, and always." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done for thousands of nights. Two souls so thoroughly intertwined that it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. And outside, the ranch stretched endlessly under the stars, a testament to what could be built when two people chose love and partnership and refused to give up, no matter how hard things got. The final years of Yates and Lydia's story unfolded with gentle grace. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1923 with a huge gathering of family and friends at the ranch. James and Sarah now had 4 children, all of them involved in various aspects of the ranch operation. Margaret and Robert had 3 daughters, all smart and ambitious like their mother. Samuel had finally married in 1920, choosing a teacher named Elizabeth, and they had 1 young son with another child expected soon. Yates was 67 now, his hair completely gray but his eyes still sharp and clear. Lydia was 63, moving more slowly because of her arthritis, but still insisting on cooking for the family gatherings and tending her garden. They had lived to see the ranch grow into one of the most successful operations in the region, had seen Amarillo transform from a rough frontier town into a thriving city, and had seen their family expand into a clan that would have made both their parents proud. On the evening of their anniversary, after the guests had gone and the grandchildren had been taken home to bed, Yates and Lydia sat on their porch just as they had done for 40 years. The porch swing creaked familiarly beneath them, and the night was soft with early summer warmth. 40 years, Lydia said wonderingly. "It seems impossible." "It went fast," Yates agreed, "though not fast enough that I would trade a single day." "Not even the hard ones?" Lydia asked. "Especially not the hard ones," Yates said. "Those taught us how strong we were. How strong we were together." They sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing and the chirp of crickets. The stars were brilliant overhead, the same stars they had watched together for 4 decades, and Yates felt a profound sense of peace. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Lydia asked. "When I told you why I had not mentioned my limp in my letters, I said I would have written back regardless," Yates recalled. "And I meant it." "I did not believe you then," Lydia admitted. "I thought you were just being kind." But I believe you now. I have seen how you love, Yates. You love completely, without reservation, without conditions. You loved me before you had any reason to, and you have never stopped." "You made it easy," Yates said simply. "From that first day, you made it easy to love you." Lydia turned to look at him, and even in the dim light, he could see the tears on her cheeks. "I was so broken when I came here," she said softly. "Not just my leg, but my spirit. I felt worthless and used up. And you put me back together, piece by piece, with your kindness and your patience and your love." "We put each other back together," Yates corrected gently. "I was broken too, just in different ways, and we healed each other." They held each other close as the night deepened around them. Two people who had defied odds and expectations to build something extraordinary. And as they finally went inside to sleep, Yates sent up one final prayer of gratitude for the day he had placed that advertisement, for the woman who had answered it, and for the moment when he had made the choice to slow his pace and see the person before him, not just her limitations, but her strength, her courage, and her infinite worth. Yates Jackson lived to be 75, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1931 with Lydia holding his hand. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched, and he was buried on the hill overlooking the ranch beside Tom and Pete, exactly where he had wanted to be. Lydia lived another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and when she passed at 71, she was buried beside her husband, their graves marked with simple stones that bore testament to a love that had lasted a lifetime. The ranch continued under James's management, passed down through generations of Jacksons who remembered the story of how it all began. They told the tale of the mail-order bride who walked off the train with a limp nobody had mentioned, and the cowboy who slowed his pace, seeing past her injury to the remarkable woman beneath. They told it to teach their children about kindness and patience, about seeing people truly and loving them completely, about building something lasting through partnership and dedication. And on summer evenings, when the family gathered at the old ranch house that had been preserved and maintained through the years, they would sit on the porch that Yates and Lydia had loved so well. They would watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, and they would remember the two people who had taken a chance on each other and built something beautiful that endured long after they were gone. The limp that had seemed like such an obstacle became instead a symbol of strength and resilience, and the cowboy's choice to slow his pace became a lesson in compassion that echoed through generations. Their love story, which began with uncertainty and fear on a train platform in Amarillo, Texas, in 1883, became a foundation upon which an entire family was built. And though the years passed, and the world changed in ways Yates and Lydia could never have imagined, the truth they discovered together remained constant, that real love sees past surface imperfections to the soul beneath, that patience and kindness can heal even the deepest wounds, and that when two people truly choose each other, they can build something strong enough to last forever.